Good morning or afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'm a marketing specialist here at Educate 360. Welcome to today's webinar, Diving Deeper with Meaningful Connections, presented by our Vice President for the Center of Leadership and Development here at New Horizons, Dr. Jay Pugh. We are in Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use the chat or the Q&A option for our short Q&A portion after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today, so without further ado, I will hand it over to you, Dr. J.
Thank you, Mariella. Appreciate it greatly, and welcome everybody to our course on diving deeper with meaningful connections. This is a little bit of a snippet from one of our more popular courses called Mastering Meaningful Engagement. And so just a little bit about me. If you're going to spend the hour, I've been in this space for about a decade and a half, if not a little bit more. I am a published author in the space of engagement, both virtual and face-to-face. And the other thing is that I'm a hashtag girl dad. I do have 4 daughters. Yep, you heard it right. 4 daughters that keep me interested all day long. So I always like to make sure I share a little bit of info. And so before I dive into this, I always like to kind of ask a couple of questions. And I would love if you all participate in the chat, just because we have over 100 people and there are more and more people already making their way in. So feel free to use the chat. I will pay very, very close attention to that. And so I'd like to think about this. I want you to think about dialogues, meetings, go-tos. What are things that you know that you prepare that make sure that those meetings and dialogues are engaging? What are things that we do? What are things that we prepare? How do you prepare? I want to open this floor up. Brenda mentions knowing your audience. I love that right out the gate. We do. We have to know our buyers, our stakeholders, if you will. We have to know what their interests are, what their needs are. Agreed entirely. Rochelle mentions research. We do. We have to do research. We have to know our content. I like that Stephen mentions verbal rehearsals. Prepare open questions, common ground. I like, once again, asking those deeper questions is always important. Have an agenda, clear objectives. Agendas and agendas I'm seeing. I agree that having a little bit of structure, clear expectations, clear objectives are going to be huge when it comes to engagement. I like that there has to be clear points that Aurora mentions. And we do have to, I really like where Cody's going with this is, I almost don't even like to just make sure that I have questions. I like to make sure that I anticipate their questions. I like to make sure that if they already have a question coming in play, and I already have them sitting in the back of my mind, that there might be some questions when it comes to deeper connections that might already come in. And yes, Barbara mentions anticipating opposing views. We have to lean into them. We have to lean into the opposing views. Now, whenever I prepare, I've learned over the years, whether it's in teaching, whether it's communication, whether it's dialogues, what I always like to do in our communication is I really try to make sure that I am very cognizant of preparing 3 ways. Now, what I call this is the CYA model of preparation. Now, how many of you are already laughing at CYA? By a show of hands or reactions, if you want to throw a thumbs up, then that means you're kind of already my people. If you're not, CYA has a tendency to stand for covering your assets, if you will. And so we want to make sure that and I'm trying not to curse at the moment because that's not the game plan, but what it does is it gives you a way that you want to make sure that you've covered all of your bases in your preparation. Now, the way that I try to bring in sort of this preparation of engagement is I actually have changed and sort of created a new dynamic for what CYA can stand for. So anytime I prepare for a meaningful dialogue, I actually prepare 3 ways. And one is, as you all mentioned, research. Content is a key thing. We want to make sure content is on point. We want to make sure we know our stuff, that we know it inside and out. But content is the smallest part of a meaningful, engaging dialogue. And Mary, great catch. We have to bring something to the table that is authentic to the way that we deliver a message. Agreed entirely. Mine is I do bring the fire, the excitement, as you mentioned. That's something that I really try to make sure I'm bringing into the table. I really try to make sure that I am being myself and being authentic while still making sure I'm capturing and captivating my audience's attention. So you have to know yourself. You have to know what it is about you that's effective in the way that you communicate. And lastly, you have to pay attention to make sure, wow, is the way that I'm communicating, is that getting buy-in from other people? Is that connecting to other people? Now, I'll give some examples of this. I am somebody that I have an acronym in the book that I wrote with Conquering the Seven Seas that ties to this. It's something that I'm huge on being passionate. I am a very passionate individual. And that doesn't matter whether you've known me 5 minutes or 5 years. It doesn't matter. That's something I know I authentically bring to the table. However, there are people to where passion may be a red light to people. So we have to understand how to scale it back and how to push it forward. Now, that's where my authenticity lives. For other people, they might be more calculated. They might be more methodical. They might be more observational. And if those are really your characteristics, you got to know that about yourself before recognizing, is this something that's going to hit with the audience? The reason why I bring this up is, and here's a heavy question for you all, how do you know if you're hitting your audience if you don't know where you're standing? How do you know if you're hitting your audience if you don't know where you're standing first? So I'm a huge proponent of knowing where I am and then gauging where other people's communication comes in. Am I connecting with them on a deeper level? So to me, CYA has now been redefined to knowing your content, knowing yourself, and then your ability to read how your audience is taking in that information. That also means anticipating, as Robert has mentioned, is anticipating those win-win scenarios and outcomes, understanding exactly where they might have questions and knowing exactly how to tie yourself into those. So I want to talk a little bit about each of these three during this hour. Now, can I accomplish everything that the Seven Seas has to accomplish? No, that's why we have a full workshop dedicated to this. Now, the first thing that I always like to do is get into content. Now, when I focus on content, the first thing that I do, and right now I have 130 something people in here right now already, right? So if that's the case, how am I going to make sure that I try to hit 134 people all at once? Well, typically I follow a lot of models that go around DISC or emergenetics. There's so many that are out there that really focus on quadrants of thinking. And so what I typically try to do in the preparation of content is I make sure that all the boxes are checked. So the first thing, and I want you to think of where you might fall into, and I know what the answer is going to be is we're all of these, and you're right. However, there's one or two of these that will gravitate to a little bit more. So I want you to think of where you find yourself gravitating to as an audience member. The first piece is substance. This is meat. This is the meat and potatoes. These are the things that really get into, as I like to say, data. So this is going to be things like data. This is going to be things like visuals, graphs, charts, tables. This is going to be evidence. This is really about what we know. This is going to be what we know. So how many of you are very, very big on data? You love good numbers. You love good visuals. Like that's what you crave when you're looking for information. You're looking for good evidence. Good. There's a few already coming into there. And that's what's really great about this. Basically, folks, and excuse my bad dad jokes for today, but you all are Lil Jon. Anybody know why? Because you turn down for what? You do. You turn down for what do we know? What supports it? What data can we provide? What visuals matter here? What tells the story of what we've done, right? And if any of you are Lil Jon fans, you've already got that one. You guys are what? There it is. Pearl, be ready. We came ready, right? Definitely like data. So in this case, you crave what is called the substance. You crave the substance. And when it comes to substance, what that means is that you crave the what? And so in every dialogue, I try to make sure there's a what component to what we're delivering. There's some sort of visual, there's some sort of breakdown, there's sort of pieces of these. I love the recovering CPA too. That's even better. And so now, how many of you are like, look, I don't mind data. Data isn't what does it for me. Who's in that category? And that's perfectly okay too. Once again, there's no wrong way to eat a Reese's. There's no wrong way to love some information, right? So there's some people that they crave information a little bit differently. And what that means is that there's people that might get into the data a little bit, but really what they're craving is the greater why, the big picture, the synthesis. What this looks like is not Lil Jon. All right, this is some Backstreet Boy action, because you got to tell me why. Tell me why. If you can tell me what, and notice where Kalo comes into play, right? How many of you are why people? Why are we doing it this way? Why is this important to the greater mission? Why is this important to goals and objectives? Why does this matter? And sometimes what we do is we have meetings, and I'll tell you this, I know this is going to rub people a little bit the wrong way, and I promise that's not the game plan, right? I'm not a huge fan of stand-up meetings. Please don't watch in the fire brigade. The reason why is because we could have those in separate asynchronous contexts. We could have those in separate asynchronous contexts. We could have threads, we could have channels that provide those updates. The reason why I like a good meeting is because we can elaborate. A stand-up meeting, Marie, is whenever you go around the room and you say, this is what I'm working on, and this is what I'm working on, and this is what I'm working on, and this is what they're working on. And nothing really comes out of it other than just updates. Sometimes we need to have these dialogues to get into a space of synthesis, to where we try to get into and we provide the bigger meeting. And Agile, I get the purpose of a stand-up to say, this is where we're at, here where we are in the sprint, here's where we're going, here's what we need. But the goal of this is also to troubleshoot bigger problems that might be coming down the road. And so what I always try to bring into the greater why is purpose, vision, mission, and goals. And so in Agile stand-up meetings, I'm a big fan of making sure that goals are always the key focus. Here's the greater mission as to why we're focusing on this first. Here's why this is a best practice. Here's why this is the mission we're trying to achieve. So who are my Backstreet Boys? Thumbs up if you're a Backstreet Boy. We got them in there. Good. Good. Excellent. Now, I guarantee you, even still, there's some people out there that are like, my box isn't checked yet, Dr. J. It ain't checked yet. No worries. And David, yes, I would say a younger crowd lives more in the why and the who. A younger crowd has a tendency to live more in the why and the who when it comes to connection. Why does this matter and who does this help? Now, there's others that go, you know what? That's not where I live, though. And so where it comes into is sometimes we need relevant examples. The reason why we need relevant examples is because we're looking for reliability, sustainability, and an effective process. How many of you are huge on things like step-by-steps, procedure, process? You love you some good numbered steps, right? Plans. Who are my planners? Look where it starts to come in. Now look, there's different hands going in there, right? Organization. Who truly loves really good. Now we're talking, folks. So do you notice that there's people that crave different components of information as it's being delivered? That's right. I'm seeing SOPs, which are standard operating procedures, right? And so when this happens, you all are the great Montel Jordan, one of the greatest one-hit wonders of all time. Anybody know why Montel Jordan? Some of you are going to start singing it in the chat, and I can already feel it. Anybody know who Montel Jordan is? saying the great one-liner of all time. This is how we do it, Emily. You are absolutely right. This is how we do it. And so they are how people. They need to know how to get from point A to point B. So we need to make sure that in our meetings and dialogues, we have a good process. Otherwise, it feels like it's just going off the rails. So for me, I really try to make sure that I'm preparing good data, a greater mission or goal, and then a process on how we get from point A to point B. And if we're missing one of those, we're going to be missing pieces of our audience. Now, there's still one left. And this is where I will tell you a majority of the younger generation does live, they are the great rock band, The Who. Who are you? Who does this impact? They like a good story that shares meaning, right? A good win, right? Big wins, connections. They like input. They like dialogue. They want to know who this helps. Who does this help? And that, folks, is where the connectivity, as Ben has just mentioned, that's where the connectivity comes into play. So sometimes when it feels like we're not connecting to some of our younger generation, part of the reason why that has a tendency to exist is because we might be speaking in a term of how, and they're speaking more in a term of who. Now, you have to think of a younger generation. They are a platform generation. So Gen Z and even Gen A have lived in a world where they have a platform to communicate their feelings and their emotions and what they think and see. They have that. That's where social media has come into play. Now, scroll up the screen. This is a one flat screen, Gordon, so I'm not sure if there's something that's cut off or if there's something that's missing. If not, I can type it up here to make it a little bit if something's cut off. The last thing on the bottom was connection and input. So when we go and we say, how do we connect to other people? They are very much a platform generation. So because of this, we have to really understand that they are thinking in the world of who more than anything else. This is also this understanding of WIFM, which is what's in it for me. What's in it for me? What am I doing to help somebody else? What am I getting out of this that means something? Why does this really matter? So we really have to be conscientious of the language we speak to others. And this goes to thinking styles. And I'll clear this out for just a moment. So when this comes down to it, what we have to be mindful of is really looking at, and I want to erase, give me 1 second, we're good, clear. So the reason why is that there's people that value different things in dialogue. So one of these things is the analytical mind values results. They value experience. They value what is known. They value that because that's concreteness. Procedural people, staying on the left side of the hemispherical brain, right? This is where left brain and right brain thinkers come in. Procedural brains are also a little bit more left-sided. And what that means is they value things like order and structure and reliability and process and planning. They value a good system. And so if people are a little bit more left-brained, if they're a little bit more left-brained, what that ends up meaning is that they value a little bit more structure. They value a little bit more reliability in information. And that's where some of us are going, yep, I'm a little bit more of a left brain. I'm seeing that in some of the panels and some of the questions, that's where our brain sits a little bit more, right? And then if we go to the right brain, this is the creative brain. And the creative brain is about big picture and relationships. It's about why we do things and who we impact when we do them. So if we're speaking from a left side brain and we're talking to people that are right side brain, what ends up happening is we can run into what is called disconnect. We can run into disconnect. So we have to be very conscientious of that. So what I always start with when I communicate with people is I build my agendas around a 4 square of content. I will, for very important meetings, whenever I'm having really big, and the goal of this, Robert, is not to have this be a war. It's not meant to be the war of the left and the right brain. The goal is to find the value in both. And so, and it is, and Ryan, and so Frank mentions that it seems to be focused on the soft skills. Today's verbiage really gets into that there's nothing soft about soft skills, that they're almost power skills because it allows power in dialogue. So it's really the way that we view the world. And so what I always try to make sure of is in every dialogue, I make sure that all 4 boxes are checked so nothing gets left out. So for instance, in today's dialogue, I want us to role play for this. We're going to do a little behind the scenes. I'm going to give you a little bit of the magic trick that I'm giving you right now. Ready for this? What substance have you learned already? Think about this. What substance have you already learned in the first 20 minutes of today's webinar? What substance was brought to the table? What have you learned? Right? There we go. We've learned the what, the why, the how, and the who, right? We've learned CYA and we've learned the 4 square, right? Very good. Excellent. We got our what's and we got our what. We got our little Johns ready to roll. Now, did we get into the why? Why are each of these important? Think of the big picture. Why are each of these important? Number 1, it provides holistic, effective communication. I agree. It provides the so what and allows, yes, this provides the so what, the with them, and it provides a way to relay to multiple audiences. You are absolutely right. Okay? So how do we achieve this? With them, Robert, was what's in it for me? What's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? What's in it for me? Relevant examples. Have we provided some? How many of you found yours, what you drive to? So how we went through this is we explained all 4. And then what I'm doing right now is we brought in bullet points. And which one of these 4 do you think you tie to the most? Which of these 4 do you think really gets you to grip? And I asked you those questions because that's where the real application starts to come in. Is which one am I? Right? And that's where some of us are saying, well, do you know what? I love good data and I love a good process and I love big picture and I like goals and I like things to be connective. So which one am I makes it connective to you? And the other thing that I'm doing is true or false. I'm asking you those open-ended questions to get you to think about the way you're thinking. True or false? This is the know yourself aspect, Barbara. You're absolutely right. So every meeting I have, every agenda I have has to have those 4 things. And you're right, Dave. Those transparent connections carry weight because it makes it interpersonal. It makes it connective in approach. It makes us think and feel that we're not going through it alone. So I absolutely agree with you there. This is how I prepare for dialogues. Any dialogue, any meeting, any connectivity piece, I have to make sure that those 4 boxes are checked. So real quick, what I want to do is I want to have a few minutes. What questions, comments, concerns do we have a little bit right out the gate? What questions, comments, concerns do we have right out the gate with the 4 square? And it could be thoughts. It doesn't have to be just questions. What are our thoughts on this? How could we apply this to our daily meetings? Barbara, I love that term of well-roundedness, right? It creates a well-rounded dialogue. It makes sure that people aren't left out. Love that. Yeah, Frank, really good idea on a new idea or a new process. And Rebecca, you're absolutely right that it invites that dialogue. It elicits that interaction. It makes it a multi-way street to communication. I couldn't agree more there. And yes, Marie, I can agree that you mentioned enjoy the concept. It is hard to execute. And the reason why is because you're spot on here. It forces us to not treat people the way that we like to be treated. It forces us to treat people the way they prefer to be treated. And that's the challenge, right? I am not a fuzzy soul, as I like to say. I'm not like this real world application. I'm not somebody that likes to get into my feelings of things. That's not where I like to live. So I really have to think hard and push hard to get into those spaces. And you're right, yes, Marie, is that it makes it tough to shift that. But with, as Sherry mentions, with practice, it gets easier. It really does. It gets us really think of this. And Ben, you've asked the question, do you execute the 4 squares depending on the setting? I do. I really do, but I might spend less time depending on how much time I have. But I will tell you that one does not get sacrificed. One does not get sacrificed. It's just less time may get. That's a really good question. I love that for problem solving. It is inclusive of all sides. And it is, and Marisol, you mentions, I really love this, is the goal is not more meetings. The goal is better dialogues. The goal is better dialogues. And Jan, I don't know if it's Jan or Jan, so I've seen it 2 ways. What I will say is when you see people's reactions, how do you know when people are connected and still getting what you said? We are actually, that's what the rest of this course is dedicated, is your ability to read their behavior in time. Jan, perfect. Thank you. So I read things like their gestures, their body language. I read into their facial expressions. I read into whether their posture's leaning in. There's several different ways you can catch into that. And so that is what we teach in Mastering Meaningful Engagement, is your ability to read it in the moment. And if you can't see it, Jan, then that's once again what we also teach in Mastering Meaningful Engagement, is getting into the space of, well, what's their reaction time? What's the depth of their response? Just like, notice all of you are engaged and you guys don't have a camera to work with and you don't have, a microphone to use. And yet the engagement is still there because of your reaction times to the chat and your approaches to the dialogue. So it can still exist, but you have to read them in real time. And I appreciate that, Shuri. Thank you. And going to some other questions, going back up, it says, makes me add to things that we're currently doing. And that's the beauty of this, Denise, is that we're not trying to do this to change the game entirely, but we're doing this to see what am I bringing in and what things can I adjust. Perfect. And I really like to have it to real time. I really like this. And it is a cheat sheet. Frank, use it as a cheat sheet. I send it in an email for agendas for big meetings. And that's excellent. And I like that, Robert, you mentioned that you bring in a why and who element. You can relate with what, but now how is the shift? Excellent, excellent, excellent. This is great, folks. This is what I like to see in the communication. It invites the dialogue. And this is, believe it or not, connective. That's what we're doing here. Now, some other things that we teach along the way of really diving into connections is really understanding the 7 C's for better engagement. Now, one of the things that I always say is what we just did there is sort of the section 1. We did it in a very small, succinct sort of piece, which is understanding how to prepare the ship. And preparing the ship is getting your 4 squares all together. It's making sure your motor works, making sure that, that we're getting into those spaces, that the sails are ready to go, that we have preparatory things also that in case things go wrong, we're ready. And it is an art to read the room, Dave. And this is where the CYA model of preparation comes into play. I want you to think about this for a minute. Does anybody notice I'm not going to be reading from slides? Has anybody caught that in the first vibe of the first 30 minutes? That isn't the nature of the beast here? So I want you to think about this as a magical mystery here. Ready? This is going to be where the mind goes. Here we go. If I know my content inside and out, and if I know exactly what makes me effective in delivering a message, which is yourself, which is that why piece, what's the only thing that you think I'm paying attention to? What's the only thing that I'm paying attention to? I'm reading you, reading your responses, reading your feedback, reading the interaction, asking the questions. How is it being received? That's huge, right? So that's the trick behind the CYA model of preparation is that if I know myself and the way I deliver a message, I know where my confidence lives. I know what I have command over, right? I know what I can change. And I'll give examples of command, change, and confidence. I know that when it comes to command, I am passionate, I'm engaging, I'm authentic, I give kindness in responses, I'm energetic. I know that I can bring that. One thing that I know that I'm not is I am not patient, and I am not super positive, and I am not a verbal hugger. And anybody that doesn't know what a verbal hugger is, those are the people that are very good at being empathetic. I'm not a super empathetic person. That's not where I naturally live, but it's knowing that that's something I need to continually practice in my mind, is that ability to change my approach and be more empathetic. And if you know what you command and you know what you need to change, all of a sudden that equals confidence. Now it equals confidence. And confidence is command plus change. Confidence is actually, believe it or not, it's a little bit of arrogance minus self-righteousness. And what that means is I'm going to walk into this room and I know I can own a stage, but I'm not going to do it to the point where you all don't have a meaningful purpose and room for validation too. You all are in this with me. And that's where it is. And the connection's working, Barbara, right? That's, folks, that's the magic behind the mystery. Now, I have to take a moment and pause this for a second, because this is probably one of the most important things you're going to learn along the way here. If you use any of this for manipulation, you will bury your reputation. Your goal is not to do this to gain leverage over another person. Your goal is to make sure that you're doing this to create mutual respect, mutual benefit, better dialogue, better interpersonal relationships. That's the goal. So your goal is to use this for influence and not manipulation. And so, Pearl, I always say if you're dealing with very bad people, the goal is to go as neutral as possible. Neutrality is the goal. Anytime I run into that, it's neutral. I teach those in other courses too. And so these three things are about really knowing yourself. And that's something we really spend time is understanding what it is about you. And it does, Kayla, it's once again, because what you're doing is those people require fire. They are fire and they need more fire. And so if you're neutral and you're objective, you're snuffing out that fire. You're not giving them the oxygen to do what they need to do. So those things, folks, is what we teach in this course. And we spend a good half day in knowing what is your command, what is your change, where's your level of confidence in these spaces. That's the first piece. The other piece that I like to get into is how do we go deeper in the connection with our audience, right? And that's a huge, huge piece. So what I always view this with connection with other people is this understanding of how deep do you go with audiences? Now, I want you to think of this from this way with all of you. There are some people that I guarantee you hands are on keyboards ready to type left and right. How many of you would agree with that? That is a level of captivation, right? It's captivation central. And so some people, we've already checked that box off very quickly. And other people, how many of you can see the deeper, clearer message underneath of this? How many of you are there as well? And you can align to it. So this is where this starts to come in, right? So captivation is your ability to get invested attention. It's your ability to get invested attention. That's where response rates and body language and facial expressions and postures and gesture and responses and feedback, that's going to be captivation. Clarity is going to be the deeper understanding, the deeper application, the deeper takeaway that comes out of this. That is where, once you've achieved clarity, it means they're bought in, that I can align to this. And connection is your ability to be human with other people. When Robert said, I feel like, Jay, you and I could be friends, that's connection. And that was mentioned. That was mentioned. Barbara said that's the connection. It's working. And the reason why is because this is where real relatability as a person comes in. It's no longer about the organization I work for or what my role is or what my responsibility or even what I teach anymore. It's about me as a human. And that is connection. And what your goal is in the way that you work with your team members or other leaders is your goal is to see where you sit with other people. Do I really have their attention? Are they captivated whenever we communicate? Are they sort of interested in what we're doing? If they are, okay, does this make sense to them and can they really buy into it? Are they really going to apply? And Dave, I always say that the moment that starts to shift from clarity to connection is ownership and buy-in. You're absolutely right. It's ownership and buy-in. And it's not just ownership for the sake of now I'm going to take responsibility. It's I believe in this. I believe in it. I'm 100% invested in this. So you're right, is that's where we want to go deeper and deeper. So what I want us to investigate with our individual relationships with others is, where am I at with all this? And I will tell you that there's people that I work with that I know for a fact that and I don't want to say they'd follow me off the earth because I would never want them to do that, but they would follow me wherever I go. They really would, and I would follow them wherever they go. There is true connection that's there. We trust each other as true people. Whereas there's others that I'm still getting to know, and I'm still trying to get the captivated attention. And so everybody sits on this line of where we are. Your number one goal, though, is no matter what happens, you don't leave any wave left unconquered. Which means if Yesmeri mentions and says, hey, I know that I struggle a little bit in one of these sectors, that means your willingness to dive further becomes the mantra and the mission. Or do you know what? I know I'm a what and a who person, but I'm not quite a how person. Then that's where that's where no wave gets left unconquered. You dig towards it. And I mean that because one thing that I've learned over time, as I mentioned, is I'm not a softie, as they say. I'm not somebody that is a super soft individual. But what I've learned is that if I know that that's my area of weakness and I know that that's my area of struggle, that's where I spend the most concerted effort to make it authentic in the way that I can deliver it. So those are the 7 C's. And so that is what I've dedicated a lot of time with the book, with the research, with a lot of it going into is understanding human dynamics in the way that we connect and we click. So how many of you already can see people on your team? You see people on your team and you could already say, I know that they are clear. They're clear. It is very clear that we're on the same page. And how many of them it's like, I can't even get them to captivate. And how many of you know that there's those employees or those people that you'll go to the end of the earth with? They will follow you into battle. So now that you see it, your goal, and this is going to be the real goal. Your goal is to make the investment. And what this investment requires from each is captivation is your ability to demonstrate and to get from them invested attention. That is captivation. Once you've achieved invested attention with them, the next goal with Clarity is getting them to see and getting you to see too invested value. What is the invested value of what we're doing? What's on the greater other end that we can get out of this? And when both people see that, it is now clear. And then when you get to connection with others, the goal there is invested trust. It means that we're transcending our work environments and we see each other for real people. We see each other as true people. I will do this for you because of who you are. It's invested trust. It's invested loyalty. So those are things that I really try to pay attention to in that communication as we go deeper and deeper and deeper. So, which of these C's do you find to be most intriguing? I like Dave mentions, can you chat more on we protect what we value? We really do. We stand by what we value more. And when we value that, we're willing to go extra for it. We're willing to push harder to maintain it. So, but the one thing is that what is clear to me is not always clear to others. So we have to go to where they are. We have to see what is clear to them. I like that Frank mentions captivation, right? That moment when you captivate, you know they're bought in. And I don't mean bought in as like, you know that you have their undivided attention at that point. And that's true, Michelle, is change is hard because it puts us in a state of discomfort too. And so we have to lean into that change. We have to lean into it. And Ray, connection with everybody. I will tell you that is something I'm still finding myself, is that all of those things take time, right? And it does. And Barbara's absolutely right that it takes multiple engagements with your team. It takes multiple steps of what we call genuine actionable steps to get to that connection. It takes time. It takes investment. It takes that true lean in, repeatability to it over and over. It takes consistency. It takes commitment. It does. But the goal is to achieve connection. That's why you can see as you're going from 1 to 6, you have to do that. And Robert, it may not be even a cutting of losses. It may just be an acceptance that with this person, I may never hit level 6 with them, but I may be able to get to level 5, and that may be the best I might ever get. That might have to be the case. You're not cutting your losses. You just know your peak points with them. So, and I got a great question, and I would agree, Kayla, is that I don't even follow active listening. I follow proactive listening, which means I look for things I'm going to listen for. And the moment that I get them, I'm going to get excited about hearing them. That's why when somebody says something, I'll be like, yes, that's it. That's what we're looking for. And I lean into that even more. Do I have tips for captivation when people are multitasking? I love that you brought up this question because I'm going to give you Michael Wilkinson's 8 core practices of effective leaders. And that's going to be, and that's one way to do it, Cherie, is individualizing the attention. But I always say that if you're going to do this, you don't call them out, you call on them to add to the dialogue. You call on them to add. There's a big difference. Yes, we don't call them out and say yes. And I'll give you a difference between the two. Calling them out is, hey, I'm just going to pick a name. Ben, I just want to make sure, are you with me? See, that is calling out. Whereas I can say, Ben, I think you and I've had a dialogue about this in the past. Or you know what? I know Ben works in this space, and Ben, you might have something that's really important here. How do you work with this? And that is the calling in. And that's why you're calling on them, because they create power. And here's the other thing you have to do. If they really weren't paying attention, you give them grace. And what I mean by grace is saying, no worries, I'll repeat. Yeah, no problem. Because they might say, hey, I was right in the middle of something. I'm sorry. Hey, no worries. No worries at all. All I was asking, and I know that you're really important in this space, is, and I give them grace and I show them that they are important to the dialogue. And I'll say, it seems like you do this really well. And I'm just trying to see what you do that's effective here. And that's where you bring them in. And that's empowerment, not requirement. And that's a huge piece. So here's some other tricks that I'm going to give you before you can start every meeting. And this is virtual. Number one, I am a massive fan that if I need to be the first one in the call. Think about this. When you're hosting a meeting face-to-face, you're normally the first one in the room setting up. And then as people come in, you say, hey, Dave. Hey, Alan. Hey, Aurora. Hey, Bobby. Hey, Jan. Hey, Jasmine. Hey, Marie. Hey, Peter. We get into that and we start doing this, right? And that's where, as people do this, I bring them into the fold as they're joining the meeting. So when people join the meeting and they hop in, I always address them by name. And that's one way on empowerment right out the gate, Dave, is that I will say, if you're hopping in this meeting and I might say, Dave, good to see you. How you been? And even then, all of a sudden, there's this subtle empowerment that says, you know that I know that you're there. And so that's where they know that this is going to be something that I'm not going to be sitting back on this one. I'm going to be in. So I always say that make sure you positively address people by name on calls, especially right out the gate. Number two, they use a 4E strategy. I think this is a little bit more of a challenge, so that's why I go with the 4 square. The 4 square is a little bit simpler. The other thing that I do is I expect rules for engagement. However, this is one thing that I'll say. Ready for this? And just quick audio check, just if somebody can relay to Barbara, if you can hear me, just, okay. So Kayla, it just might be on your audio, Barbara. So one thing I like to do, and this is a little bit of a trick to empower people as well, I lay out ground rules without laying out ground rules. Did anybody know what I did for today's webinar? How did I tell you that I didn't say you all need to participate for this? I didn't do that. But what I did, I encouraged the engagement, right? But how did I do it? You're absolutely right, Stephen. I definitely encouraged the engagement. But did I point you to a specific place to do so? I asked questions. I said, yes. I said, please feel free to use the chat. The chat, I will read it. I will pay close attention to it. And I'm letting you know the outlet you're going to be using to communicate. Yes, it's a call to action, Tina. That's exactly right. So I expect ground rules without having to tell you what the ground rules are. And then I absolutely follow through to it. It's the same thing that I do in meetings saying, hey, all, listen, when it comes to cameras, I teach the purpose of cameras. And I don't say you all need to be on camera. What I say is, you know what? Did you know that 55% of how we communicate is on camera? It's how we show it. And so I play a game with them called The Last Thing. The last thing I would ever want is miscommunication. The last thing I would ever want is for us to have a misunderstanding because I couldn't see you. So I'm not asking you to be on camera because it's, what are you doing? I'm asking you that if you're on camera, I don't want to miss anything. Because that's 55% of how we communicate. So that's empowerment. Other things that I do is I engaged around Robins. I do ask those open-ended questions, which is what Rebecca mentioned, that absolutely I ask those questions. Always ask questions first. Lead with questions. Don't lead with data. Lead with questions and then get to the data. If you have longer meetings, get a brainstorm in there. Throw a breakout. I will tell you personally, I am not a key fan of using a lot of breakouts. One is enough. Don't overuse the breakouts. But I do like it because sometimes people might say, I feel more comfortable communicating with 3 other people than speaking up in front of the whole group. So sometimes encouraging a little bit of a breakout is a really good idea. This one's my favorite. Anybody else notice what I've been doing whenever I'm trying to get quick agreement from you? What have I asked you to do? Everybody catch it? What have I asked you to use? Yeah, use an emoji. Throw me a thumbs up. Show the hands, right? This is, I can't tell you, this is one of the most critical mistakes that happen. I mean this. One of the most critical mistakes that happen is that people will assume that we're good before we leave the meeting. And we'll say, any questions? And then they won't say anything. And then they assume that everything's good. And then you leave the meeting and you get 20 more questions. So what I always say is number one, I say, what questions, comments, thoughts do we have? Because I know if you don't have a question, you might have a comment. And if you don't have a comment, you might actually have a thought that's coming in. And so that's what I like to bring in. The other thing I do is, all right, so if we're on the same page, ready? And I'll do it right now. If you've learned one thing of value so far today, throw a thumbs up in the reactions where it says reactions, throw a thumbs up or a smiley face, or if you want to throw a party hat, do that too, but throw something. This, as you're seeing this in the chat, folks, is verbal agreement. This is verbal agreement. So before you leave dialogues, get verbal agreement. I only screen share when I got something to screen share. There's no mystery or magic to it. But sometimes people will still be talking and they won't even be on the information that they're on, and everybody's eyes are still going to the screen. So if you need to remove a screen share to where it just makes it you, stop the screen share and get to people. It makes a big, that transition makes a big difference. Lastly, I always try to do a summary. And what I always try to do is I ask them, what's one takeaway that stood out to you during this meeting? What's one quick takeaway you can apply? What's one thing you learn you can move with? What's one thing you're going to do tomorrow? And so that's my final question for you, believe it or not, is what's one thing you learned today that really, really stood out to you that you're going to apply tomorrow? Love this. Excellent. Do you notice that everybody's looks a little different? And that's perfectly okay. This I love, folks. This is excellent. And everybody's takeaways can look a little different. Yes, absolutely, Adrian. So the 7 C's, this is from, and this is a book that I wrote called Conquering the 7 C's, and it's for face-to-face and online engagement. And so this is something that I've spent a lot of time on over the last kind of decade and a half. And this is where the 7 C's is about. 3 of them are really knowing yourself. 3 of them are really shifting to your audience. And the last one is opening the floor up and really just making sure that you're constantly looking for the next thing. And CYA of preparation, yes, is covering your assets. But what it really stands for is content, knowing your content, knowing yourself, and the way that you really deliver a meaningful message, and knowing exactly what your audience needs to captivate, connect, or create clarity and connect. And Jennifer, no worries if you were late. The class, the link of the class, and Mariella can definitely help with this, is the course itself is called Mastering Meaningful Engagement. Mastering Meaningful Engagement is the name of the course. It is a very popular course of ours, and the reason why is for exactly these reasons. And the other thing is that with somebody asked about the book in one of the Q&A panels, The book is called Conquering the Seven Seas. You can get it a few different places. I have a website. Amazon has it as well. But it really is about strategic engagement, and it really is how you connect with others. Okay. Excellent. Final questions, comments, concerns for today while we have a couple of minutes. What final questions, comments, concerns do we have? And there's been really good questions already asked, so I've kind of got to answer those out the gate. Wonderful, wonderful. Excellent. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I agree, Stephen. Let's go make more meaningful, engaging dialogues. I'm in. Excellent. Well, I really want to thank you for joining this webinar. Hang on tight because Mariella's got one thing to talk to you about. How do you engage with people that aren't flexible? Oh, we teach that. I could teach a whole segment on that, Valerie. What I always try to find the people that aren't flexible, I always go to where they are first to understand where they're coming from. And then I guide them back gently to the middle. It's also known as pole theory, and I teach that in a course called Extending Your Sphere of Influence. But you can't get anybody to move if you don't move your pole first.
Hey there, everyone. Thank you so much for answering those questions, Dr. J. Just wanted to come in and let our audience know that if you guys need any more info on this topic, please do not be afraid to visit us at newhorizons.com. And if you missed out on a part of the session, we will be sharing this recording with all of you in an email after the webinar. So be on the lookout for that if you missed out on any part of the session. But it looks like we got through all of our questions. So I just wanted to say thanks again, Dr. J.
Yeah, absolutely. And Nicole, for how this might be easily applied for somebody in a sales role, this is something we do actually teach a lot of salespeople. And the reason why is the ability to capture and really read the body language that goes into it. So the captivation strategies and reading into their nuances is a huge, huge skill in understanding where buy-in comes into play. And that's something we actually spend time in that Mastering Meaningful Engagement course. So I'm really glad you brought this up.
It's a fantastic point. Thank you so much, Nicole. But other than that, I believe that is it. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Thank you again so much, Dr. J. Enjoy the rest of your day, everyone.
Absolutely. Thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Alrighty. Goodbye.